Remember to unmute myself this time so people can actually hear me. So, but yeah, no, Ish and I were tweeting about how much we would enjoy a D&D themed Rent musical. And I mentioned that Amy Vorpal already kind of half made the music for it because Songs in the Key of D&D sounds like a Broadway musical. You just got to sort of put a plot around it and figure out if what did I say? Figure out if it is a D&D musical based on Rent or a D&D musical based on La Boheme, which is of course what Rent is based on. Now it's live, so I can retweet it and not feel guilty. There we go.
Of course, I posited that if there was a D&D musical, it should be called Loot
instead of Rent. So that's what we were talking about. Amy jumped in on the conversation with us. Anthony and Tito hadn't said anything yet, but they're still early enough. They might just be getting out of work or whatever. Although I don't know how much Anthony Rapp is working right now in the pandemic.
True that.
Well, I never quite understand the Twitch numbers. And who's there and who's not, but that's okay. We have recorded before with nobody who shows up to watch us, and that's okay.
It's true.
So are we ready to get going?
Yeah.
Let's get the script up.
Yeah, me too. I suppose that would be helpful. All right. You ready, Trace?
Yep.
You ready, Ish?
I am.
And I'm as ready as I'm going to be, so let's go ahead and do this. All right. We are recording. Say hi to Sam.
Hey, Sam.
Hi, Sam.
All right. This episode of the Tome Show is brought to you by AwesomeDice.com, the most awesome place to get dice. And listeners like you. Thanks for using the Tome's Amazon and DM's Guild affiliate links, and for being patrons at patreon.com/thetomeshow. Welcome to the Tome, a D&D news, reviews, and interviews show, and I'm your Tome host, Jeff Greiner.
And I'm Tracy Hurley, and in this episode, number 348, we're going to find a new hope for our campaign by adding some new players.
And joining us in this episode is the Tome Show social media manager, writer for Fat Goblin Games, DM for roughly, I don't know, I'm estimating probably you're up to 736 games all running simultaneously at this point. Welcome back, Ismail Alvarez.
It's good to be back, as always.
I figured that it's been several months since you were last on, and the last time we chatted, I felt like the number of your games that you were running in a week was growing exponentially. So is that 700 some games? Is that fair now?
Yeah, since the start of the pandemic, my gaming load grew exponentially. Or correct. I am at 8.5 a week right now. When that 0.5 is I game every other week on Sundays. As one of those games, and so I count that as a 0.5. But yeah, I've been trying to manage that number, and it seems like anytime I try and cut one game out, it's a Hydra. Just I cut one game out and two more sprout in its place.
8.5 games a week. And last time I checked, there were 7 days of a week. Do you have any days off?
Funny enough, Thursdays and Saturdays. So Mondays I have 2 games, Tuesday I have 2 games, and then Sunday it's a game and a half. So the math ends up coming out. But Saturdays I have nothing going on, and I hope to keep it that way because I hope to keep myself sane.
Yeah.
And I do play in 1.5 of those games. So there's
okay.
that.
You're not running all of them.
No, only
you're only DMing 6 games a week.
Yes.
Oh man. More power to you, but you got to know that is ridiculous, right?
Oh, yeah, I know full and well. It is completely ridiculous. And I say I tried to cut one out, and then suddenly a group was like, "Hey, we really want you to run a game for us." And I'm like, I don't know. I don't feel like I have the time. And they're like, "We'll pay you." So I was
Oh,
like, I can make the time.
yeah, I was wondering, are you getting paid for your time on all these games? One of them, anyway.
Just one so far, but I'm hoping that that'll be the start of a beautiful relationship.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're doing it enough. You could make a job of it. I'm not generally a big fan of DMing as career or as job, but if you're going to be running that many games and people are begging you to do it, then I guess there's a market, right?
It certainly where I'm at.
Yeah.
I definitely seem to be finding enough people. It seems every time I turn over a rock, there's a group that wants me to run a game for them.
I guess. Good on you.
I sense 2 potential future advice episodes. 1, how to run a game for money. And 2, how to handle DMing that many games.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And
Yes.
that's going to be amazing. So, Jeff, let's get on those.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the topic for this recording is Ismail's doing as well. I recognize
Yes.
I've been exhausted from the semester and just couldn't dedicate the mental energy to figure out and organize an episode. So I just sort of tweeted about it, and Ish was like, "How about this?" I'm like, "Okay, but you have to be on it." So here we are. Yeah. You have to be on it, and it's in 2 days. Can you do that?
Yeah.
Yes.
So here we are.
Yeah. And then everyone should not forget that this episode of Tome Show is brought to you by support of AwesomeDice.com. They sell awesome dice, but they also have gift cards. You can choose from $10, $25, $50, or $100 gift cards. Use Amazon Pay to pay for them, and you can give them as gifts to people in your life who appreciate Awesome Dice. Check them out, AwesomeDice.com, and be sure to tell them Tome Show sent you. And good way to help your DMs
There you go.
and
There
other
you go.
folks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you run a game for people if they paid you in dice? Like every player brought you 1 die every single week?
Oh gosh, yeah. But we would have to figure out how to make it sets, because when I have dice that don't match, it drives me a little
Yeah, you'd
batty.
have to have the right number of players so they can each, you're in charge of the D4s, you're in charge of the D20s.
Or they can just give the gift cards.
Or give gift cards. Perfect.
That's freaky.
All right. So as we...
I
go
did.
ahead.
So about this. Oh, I'm so sorry. I was just gonna say, one of my groups about a year ago did give me a gift basket, so that was
nice.
really nice. It was specifically because I was running the game for them.
Nice. Yeah. No. My current group is very, they're very very generous. When I first moved here and before we'd ever even run a game, but I had agreed to slide in and become their DM. They were an established group. This is relevant to the topic. They were an established group who lost their DM, and I was a DM moving to a new area, and so it was serendipity. But they got me one of those little meteorite D20s, right? As sort of a welcome gift. Here's a little meteorite D20. So I don't even play with that one. It just sits on the shelf.
Yeah. It would be like that sapphire one that they sold a while
Right.
back. I wouldn't play with that.
Yeah, right. So, but then every year, every year for the last 2 years that I've been here, come Christmas time, everybody sort of does the gift exchange of geeky game-based things. Like the name of the current party is Guest Services. So one guy made like notebooks with our logo on it and the name, so I got a Dungeon Master one, and it's just graph paper, and on the back it's got the map of Barovia with been there, done that, because we had just finished Curse of Strahd. So it's little things like that. The same guy the first year got us all Guest Services pint glasses, and so I've got that in my cupboard. Nice. And I had Tome Show artist Jay Sloan. Custom. She does dice. She makes custom dice, and so I had her custom make clear dice with a raven skull embedded on the inside for everybody as well. So we all do the exchange thing and give each other geeky sort of campaign themed gifts and whatever. It's a very generous group.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but that is not necessarily exactly the topic that Ish brought to us today. The topic was how to go about sort of incorporating a new player to an established group. Whether it be sort of at the beginning of a new campaign or in the middle of an ongoing campaign and all that kind of stuff. So that is what we are here to talk about in this episode.
Absolutely.
Unless I lied to everybody and you thought we were doing something else.
No, that is exactly what I wanted to talk about. And
okay, good.
Relevant to some recent happenings. So I thought that would be a good way to explore it.
Yeah. So I thought pertinent to the question or to the topic is first, how and when might that happen? Like when we're talking about adding a new player to an established group, what are the circumstances that occasionally occurs?
Well, so in my running of the 6 games a week, I have found that it is largely, and it's like someone in my game is like, oh man, you got to check this out. It's really cool. And they'll bring someone along. And so suddenly I'll find myself in a game that's been going for months, close to a year, and then trying to integrate someone new. And it's always tricky. I don't think that there's like a cure-all, catch-all kind of way of doing it that's especially organic. And I guess your mileage may vary. That's why we're talking about this. But the hard part is just like bringing them in to a group that's like got established history. They've done a whole bunch of stuff. They've got like all kinds of inside jokes and stories. And the hardest part is making the new person feel like they're a part of the group when, there's so many moving parts that they have to kind of integrate into.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the ways that happens, right? You've got an ongoing group and things are awesome and people are talking about it and then somebody else is like, oh, that sounds awesome, and pretty soon, you're a DM and one of your players is coming to you saying, hey, can I bring so and so along? They want to play too, right? And then you have to integrate them in. Are there other examples that we've run into where you've added new players to a group?
Let me think. One of the biggest ones is like somebody leaves or a number of people leave. So it might be the kind of thing where 2 or 3 people leave. Maybe they've had to move away. It's like you've got like the 2 brothers and their friend who are just moving out of town. And so all of a sudden it's like, well, we got to inject new life into this campaign, or like, I don't know if you guys want to run just me and 2 people, like that's kind of the example. But I find that there's this kind of threshold where people feel less comfortable playing a game, and so eventually you just kind of have to pad it out to about 3 or 5. That's typical, but not always. And so that's when it's almost different. Like you have to go out and start recruiting people.
Right. And that's kind of where I was thinking was there's kind of 2 angles where this usually happens. It's either somebody was interested and convinced somebody to sort of introduce them and bring them into the group, or you were interested in growing the size of your group and went out and recruited, possibly from friends, but could also be, I posted some random places on the internet or at the local game shop or whatever, and we just found new players that nobody to join that nobody knows. And I feel like there are some nuanced differences to how you might address those 2 different situations sometimes. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any others that I'm missing?
I guess technically it kind of fits in the first one, but if you have a member who finally got old enough to play, we don't have that yet, but I could see that happening.
But you're thinking about that, right?
Yeah.
I've certainly had... I've certainly occasionally over the years had to field the question from my kids of, "Oh, you need a new player? I'll join in." And then we have to have a conversation about how, well, that would be great, except this is kind of the adult game, and the themes are not necessarily one that I want to. And even as like my oldest has gotten to be a teenager, it's not that the themes are inappropriate for him. They're just not the kind of things that I feel like he would be comfortable doing with dad at the table, you know? Digging into themes that might involve sexuality or whatever with dad right there at the table might not be super comfortable.
Right.
Which is, incidentally, and as a tangent, part of why I started my Sunday afternoon group game, which is just me and my children. So they get to play regularly as well now. They are running they're playing Descent into Avernus. Because we got those big fancy boxes, and I need to use them as much as possible.
But I was going to say that kind of plays into the idea too. It's sometimes it's about prepping someone to play instead of just bringing them in to a whole established campaign. And that's something that I've dealt with as well. It's really funny that you mentioned all of that, because one of the groups that I actually play or run the game for, there had been a couple of times where work obligations made it so I couldn't run the game. So one of my players would run like this kind of the series of one-shots. And when he did, one of the other players brought his son in because he felt like that was a good way to kind of, prep him for the game. And it was like, a better way to onboard than like, oh, here's all this lore and, exposition that you need to know to kind of jump in and hit the ground running. No, it's like, here's just a really quick, fun, quirky one-shot that you can kind of, you cut your teeth on and kind of understand how this game works and not have to worry about the whole weight of the rest of the campaign. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think the first thing to think about before we even get to how do you bring a new player into an established group, whether and then the two different scenarios, new campaign or ongoing, I think the first question to really ask though is how do you know if the person is going to be a good fit with the group? Game aside, how do you know bringing in this other person to the group is going to work out? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good question. I think back to when I was running the middle school D&D club games and so on, and it was maybe like a crash course in figuring out how different personalities would mesh, because there was no choice really. Sometimes you could kind of mix and match with two different groups, but sometimes it was just like, okay, there are personalities that are going to clash, and we kind of have to deal with that and try and find some maturity. And it's funny because it's you find a lot of parallels when you're doing the games for middle schoolers as you would for full-grown adults, and you find a lot of those same kind of parallels and such. But it helps to know how to negotiate those differences. But that being said, it's not a catch-all, and you do still have to really I find myself being very intentional. If I find a new player who wants to let's say join one of my games, I would really have to give it some thought as to where they would fit best. For their sake, just as much as for the groups. It would be unfair to put someone in a group where they weren't doing terribly, they wouldn't get along terribly well. And sometimes it's just not so much personalities as it is play style. So maybe this group likes hack and slash, this group likes social emotional drama, and you want to find the best fit for people, because play styles have a lot to do with someone's expectations and enjoyment of a game, I find. But that's almost a separate topic.
Well, and I find that a lot of times, sometimes you have the ability to say, let's get to know each other. Let's see if you're going to be a good fit with the rest of the group or not. And I think there are some good ways to do that. Before, when I moved here. I'm in the South Bend, Indiana area. And when I moved here a couple years ago, I was coming in as I was the new player joining an established group. I had a group that lost a DM, and I was a DM looking for a group, and so it worked out really well. But I also like wanted to navigate this, and that also put me in a weird place, right? Because on one hand, as the DM, you're kind of the authority of the game. On the other hand, in this situation, you're also the outsider because they all know each other and have been playing for a while without you. And so I wanted to sort of try to navigate those waters a little bit. And so we decided, before we get together, before we start playing the game, let's all bring a card game or a board game, and we'll get together at the local game shop, and we'll eat at the restaurant next door, and we'll just sort of hang out, have drinks, have a meal, go play some card games for a night, get to know each other a little bit and feel it out. And if nothing else, it was a way of being like, let's make sure that the others of us aren't creeps before we start inviting each other into our houses, with where we have kids living, because the game has been housed in two different houses at this point. Mine, and I have kids, and a couple, a husband and wife, hosted it for while we were moving in, and they have kids, and so there was a. We all wanted to make sure it was going to be okay to bring people into our homes when we had kids and all that. And so that was a good way. And I think that's a good, if you can do that, I think that's actually, it worked well. And I think it's a good idea. Get to know people a little bit outside of the campaign, get together somewhere for drinks or dinner or at the local game shop and play some games or whatever. Right. And so that worked pretty well for us. But I've also had a lot of times where, there's a lot of situations where you don't really have a lot of, you talk about, see if this person's a good fit for this group, or maybe I'll put them in that group or whatever. Most of us don't have those options. We only have the one group, right? And the player who's coming in, if they're joining because, one of the group members was friends with them or was talking to him about it and brought him in, or just as often I found that I, as the DM, met somebody and invited them to come in and join or whatever. In that situation, they're specifically coming to join the group, and if the play style is different, we kind of just figure that out in the first couple of sessions. I've had not here, but in the North Carolina, when I lived there for 11 years, and I had one group there the whole time, but we had at least 2, if not 3 or 4 different instances where new players joined the group, stuck around for a couple of weeks, and then left. And I would argue we even had a few that stuck around for longer, stuck around for 9 months or a year or 2 years before they just decided the game wasn't really their style anymore and went their own way. And I think that's fine. I think that's an okay way to do it too. Let's just test it out and see how it goes for a few weeks, see if we're all having fun with this, and then go from there. And if you don't want to keep playing, no hard feelings. We still like you. You can still be friends with the people that invited you to come. But this isn't how you're going to spend your time together, and that's okay.
And I do believe that was my large part of my experience circa year 2000 to 2010 was just a lot of trial and error. Mm-hmm. And some of that was looking for a whole new group after our last group had kind of dissolved, and really just trying to see who gelled, trying not to get your feelings hurt when 2 or 3 people left all at once. But it is a lot of trial and error, and I think maybe in those days it was a little bit more. What's the word? I think everyone was treading carefully, and everyone was like, "Are these really the people that I want to spend a day out of the week with into perpetuity?" And I think maybe that you get more games and you have more people playing. There's less of a sense of I might be stuck with this group, and more of this could be just a fun thing that I don't have to feel like I'm kind of anchored to.
Yep. Yeah. So I think if you can afford to sort of get to know people before you bring them in and sort of gauge whether they're going to be a good fit or not, then that's great, right? I certainly recommend if you're the player, if you're the member of the group who's talking to a friend about your game and they show some interest, I encourage you to sort of do that mental math in your head real quick to be like, is this person going to like significantly clash with anybody at the table? If they are, maybe I suggest some places where they could find their own group, or go to the local game store and join up with some Adventures League to test some things out, or whatever, right? Encourage them to play. Start a new group with them. That's what Ish does, right?
That's about the long and the
short of it. They may not be the perfect fit here, but let's just start another game. That's fine.
Yeah.
But
you too can.
Oh, go ahead.
You too can become a manager. Because this conversation is reminding me a lot of just that type of thing. Like people I know who do more management stuff, talking about trying to figure out learning styles or even just interaction styles, and knowing pretty early on if two people are likely to hit it off. So it's a good place to practice those skills or even learn them too, in a fun way rather than
something a little less high stakes.
Yeah.
Although it doesn't always feel low stakes, because when players aren't gelling, like it's stressful and it feels like there's a lot of drama. So you do want to take at least a thought to, is this going to work? Or sometimes there's obvious signs like this person's not going to gel with that person. Maybe it's not worth it, right?
Right.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say all this talk of managerial stuff. It makes me wonder if we could write a book called "Who Moved My Dice."
a self-help book where D&D teaches us how to manage others.
Yeah,
and that feels like the kind of thing that Shelley Mazanoble was writing several years back now, right?
Yeah, I think that was kind of the crux of it, right?
I miss those books. Those were the good old days. I remember interviewing her about that, Tracy.
Yeah.
She told me that we were going to get together at Gen Con and get pedicures, and that never happened.
We'll have to.
I still remember that you and I and she and her husband Bart, who also works for Wizards, were all going to go out and get pedicures at Gen Con at some time, and it just never quite came together. But we'll have to.
Well, she's writing another book, isn't she?
She is. She and Greg Tito are writing a book together about Dragon Talk, and all the people they've talked to and all the things they've done. So yeah, okay. So think about whether or not somebody's going to be a good fit before you invite them, and then I think it's if you can do sort of a let's get together outside of the normal campaign and get to know each other a little bit, then that's fine too. But I find more often than not, you find out whether or not you're a good fit with the group in play, usually within the first few sessions, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's been most of my experience. Most of my experience when somebody who's joined a group and it didn't work out, they knew within the first couple of weeks, and then we're like, "Hey, thanks for inviting me. This isn't really what I'm looking for right now, but thanks, and that's okay. I don't think I've ever had anybody do that, and I felt bad about it because we tried it out. They wanted to try it out. Everybody was happy trying it out, and it just didn't work. And usually that's a play style thing, right? Somebody might have come from a wargaming background, and so that's kind of what they had in their mind, and that's not the game that was being played. And so, one of the players was coming from. We were playing 4th edition, and they were a big 3rd edition player who'd never played 4th edition before, and we were several years into it at that point, and so. They got into it and said, "Yeah, I'll give it a shot," and then it just wasn't what they wanted, and so after they tried for a few weeks and then went their way. I've added new players in my current group as well, but that might be worth talking about as we get into our other topics. and that is I think it's probably easier. No, I think let's start with the hard one. You've got a group, you've got an ongoing campaign, you're in the middle of that campaign, and a new player is going to join. How do you do that? Because I think once you figure that out, talking about adding a new player to a new campaign is a little bit easier of a conversation because we've already established most of the things.
Yes. And I mean, that's exactly the situation that I was in most recently, where it was kind of amusing. So this is a game that I stream. And so we get a couple of bots that watch us every week, but it is now a Monday game that started off as a Curse of the Crimson Throne, which curiously is a Pathfinder adventure path that I ran in 5th edition and had a blast doing. And the people that I was running it for, they went and told one of their really good friends. They said, "Hey, you got to come and watch this. We stream. It's a blast." And the person they asked, they were like, if it wasn't pandemic times, I probably wouldn't watch. But like, I literally have nothing better to do. Let me watch. Mm-hmm. Kind of coming in skeptical, and then she was really jazzed and really excited, and asked if she could play. And so I kind of gave that campaign concluded, and I kind of gave everyone a couple of options, and it was a great entry point for her. But what the rest of the players really wanted was to continue with the same characters. They were very invested, and they were like, "No, we don't want to start over. We've fallen in love with our characters. We really want to keep going." And I think I talked about this about the time Rime of the Frost Maiden came out, because this was a group of level 10 people that wanted to play Rime of the Frost Maiden, and I'm like, how am I going to make that work? Mm-hmm. But I just brought everything up to be a challenge, and it's been working out pretty good. But I did feel bad for our new. She was coming in with the experience, playing a 10th level druid, because I was just like, play whatever you want. Don't limit yourself by what the other people say. Like, oh, we need this or we need that. Just play whatever you want. And so she picked a druid, and just that, like, fifth edition is by far the easiest edition of D&D to bring people into, and it's really awesome because it's easy to grasp, and there's a low level of complexity even with that at 10th level as a druid. I feel bad just bringing someone in brand new to play something like that with all the spell options and wild shape and all this other stuff. So she then, this new player then asked if I could run this game. This is the one that I was alluding to before. She's like, "Oh, I know a lot of teachers and they want to play. Most of them have never played before." And she says, I won so that I can kind of get a better feel for everything. And so that's the game that I'm now getting paid to play or to run. And so that was kind of a really good solution. But in absence of being able to add to a Dungeon Master's workload, it is just the trickiest part is figuring out how to bring someone in with a character who's going to feel like they're part of the group and with that level of complexity.
Yeah.
So I got it.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I have a question. How are we differentiating this from the case of a person who's already in the group who loses, like, their character dies, and then they want to introduce a new character? Because there could be some overlap.
Yep. I think there's some similar advice to give in some regards, right? Because either way, you're introducing a new character into the group, but a new player adds a whole extra dynamic, because at least if I have a player whose character dies and they're bringing in a new character, like, they are still an established figure in the group as a player, and I find that a lot of times the other players are a lot more willing to almost extend the belongingness from the previous character to the new character just to smooth things over and make things easier. And I find that people will do that with new players as well, a lot of times, but it doesn't feel as organic, right? There's a little bit of momentum for the established player with a new character that they can sort of ride, but that momentum, that social momentum, isn't there for the new player to the group. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So yeah, so I've I guess I don't know. It feels like I have brought in new players to an ongoing campaign at every sort of tier of a campaign before. So at least in my anecdotal experience, I've run into some things that seem to work and some things that don't. Right? On one hand, if you got an experienced player coming in and they're just trying out a new group, and then I don't feel bad if they try it out for a few sessions and then they don't like it, and that's fine. And they might not like it because the play style is different, and they might not like it for the very real reason of there's an ongoing thing going on here, and I don't feel like I'm part of it. And if I stuck around long enough, I probably would be, but I just don't feel like it's worth it to try to integrate into that ongoing story. And that's fine. I feel a little bit worse if it's somebody who's completely new to the game, because I don't want them to have a bad experience with their first time playing. I don't want them to give up on the hobby and with gaming because I couldn't adequately integrate them into a new group,
Yeah, that's probably my greatest fear, is just taking someone who's brand new to the game and through whatever, course of actions or events, that they just decide, oh, I guess D&D is just not for me. And if someone reaches that conclusion organically, like everything goes right, but they just aren't feeling it, I definitely feel better than if like I made a mistake or I, made the choice of putting them together with like a person or persons who just like personalities clashed or play styles clashed, and they otherwise might have, found, that they did like D&D and that they wanted to continue playing. But I think in that same way of like fifth edition being like so much easier to run, it's bring people in. And I found that at least that degree of like maybe math anxiety or like system anxiety isn't as prevalent as it was. Like, I don't want to pick on Pathfinder, but like that was one that was hard to bring people into because it was like, okay, read these 3 books.
Right, well, and not, I mean, Pathfinder borrows that problem from third edition. Like, third edition D&D was a game that heavily rewarded system mastery. And new players don't have system mastery by definition, right?
And yeah, to be fair, it was exactly the same thing with third edition, where like, yeah, you just had to know the game backwards and forwards, and it was not really forgiving to new people. But yeah, I mean, that being said, that's just an example. I'm not picking on third edition or Pathfinder, but that is to say, it's just so much nicer to like have at least the system not be a source of anxiety for either the person running the game or the person just playing for the first time.
I found so I know what is it, 5th edition Adventurers League talks about, what is it, 4 tiers of play? Does that sound right?
You're talking about
tiers
like
of the levels,
different levels. Yeah. So so there's the first tier, which is levels 1 through 4. Second tier, 5 through 10. Here, I believe, is 11 through 16, and then the fourth tier is 17 through 20.
Okay.
I did quite a bit of Adventures League, so right. Those numbers are kind of familiar.
And I find people who I don't know. I find there are corners of the internet wherein they talk about the tiers of 5th edition D&D as if that's a thing that everybody should just know, and I don't. Not in the way that I thought about it in 4th edition. To my mind, the 4th edition tiers sort of were very definitive, like, because you could break down like, this is the type of story you're going to tell in each tier of the game, and so I still break it down into 3 tiers because that's what 4th edition did, and that's what makes the most sense in my head canon.
Yes.
But I find if you take D&D and you split it up into sort of 3 tiers like that, and I might even give first tier a decent range, 1 to 9, and then break it up, 10 to 5 and 15 and above or whatever. But I find that bringing in a new player to an ongoing campaign in the first tier is a much easier prospect.
gosh,
than
yes.
bringing them in later. In the first tier, you're largely still playing adventures that are establishing the setting, and you're definitely the characters' backgrounds and their stories matter, but it's still a lot of establishing and learning what those backgrounds and those stories are. By the time you get to the high level tier, that levels honestly probably 12 or 13 and above. The stories are largely driven by those players and their backgrounds and their loose ends and the things that they need to sort of wrap up. That becomes the story. And that's much harder to bring somebody completely new into because they don't have an established story with which to pull from. And when you do, it doesn't mean much because, well, that's just a thing that was made up just now. Like that wasn't established over the last 6 months of play or year of play, or it doesn't have the same oomph, right? It's just this sudden random new puzzle piece thrown into the jigsaw puzzle. So and then there's that middle tier, and at the middle tier, I think if somebody wanted to join my campaign in the middle tier, I would make it clear to them the situation they're finding themselves in, and that it might be difficult to integrate them into the group, but it's doable, right? The early levels, I got no hesitation bringing them in, right? I brought in a new player into my current group because it was a coworker who was kind of into gaming, and he was new to town, and I was new to town, and he and I came in the same cohort, and we're in the our faculty sort of social gatherings. He and I would hang out and whatever, and when he mentioned he was a tabletop gamer, I'm like, oh well, if you ever want to play a D&D group, let me know, right? And that's that, and then he took me up on it, and here he comes, right? But they were like level, I don't know, 5 at that time, and he played a character, and the character, well, they weren't even level 5, they were like level 3. He brought in a character, the character didn't really work for him or the group because of playstyle issues, but he recognized that and said, hey, can I just like retire that character now and start a new character? And that worked out pretty well. And then he got his footing under him, and he's just an integral part of the group now, 10 levels later. But that's that would have been much more difficult to do if he came to me now when they're all level 13 and said, hey, I want to take you up on that offer and join your D&D group. It's like, oh, well, we're kind of in the third act and everything's all like character driven at this point, and that's going to be hard to do. Why don't you wait a few months when we're starting a new campaign? That'll make more sense, And so I think that's the approach I recommend, right? If you're at lower levels earlier in your campaign, still establishing who the characters are and what the story's going to be and what the setting is, then that's a fine time to bring in a new player to an ongoing campaign. If you're in the third act and things are kind of winding down and wrapping up but hitting all these big climaxes that are character based, then I would definitely recommend, like, don't even try. Just tell them, hey, why don't you pop back in? Why don't you check back in with me in a few months? We'll be done with this campaign. We'll be starting fresh, and that'll be a perfect time to join. Right? And if you're in that in-between phase, it really depends on how much work they do to try to convince me.
What do you feel about like having them play NPCs or finding other ways maybe of doing one-offs that still work for the rest of the group?
Mm-hmm.
So like flashbacks and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I feel like that kind of thing works well under certain conditions, right? If they're already a gamer, right? They already know role playing, they're comfortable with that, and they just want to sort of. It's almost like the get together to play card games ahead of time, right? It's a chance for them to sort of just jump in as a guest for 1 or 2 sessions, test it out, see if they mesh well with the group or whatever. Then that, I think, works fine. If it's somebody who's relatively new to gaming, I think it's too much to ask them to jump in, immerse themselves in playing a character when they aren't comfortable doing that and don't know the system and have to be taught along the way. I feel like that's probably too much to give them a good experience. Does that make sense?
I mean, it totally does. And I've been guilty of bringing people in with like, a month or 2 before the campaign ends. And it works, but it definitely, like, you have to do a lot of vetting, I think. And it's not so much even like, will these people, get along? It's more like, do you understand that this is like the end point of the game, and that are you fine with that? Like you might be, like I think I had that very real conversation of saying exactly those words of, you're going to be going into a group where everybody has like this established history and all of these kind of like stories that they've told, and you're not going to get to be a part of that at this point because it's already done, and this is just kind of like, landing the plane on the runway, so to speak. And you're going to get to kind of experience this cool like glory of like having these this story like conclude, but you're also going to kind of miss out on a lot of the things that led up to it. And they were fine, and that worked out. It was a lot of explain, I think, to
it's a little bit like if Infinity War and Endgame were your first Marvel movies, right? Like, it is a rollicking, fun, action-packed story, and you can have a blast doing it. But there's a lot there that you just don't grok, and that's okay. You can hang on for the ride and have a blast, and then be really interested and go back and watch those movies, and catch up to that story, or in the D&D case, that was a blast playing those, level 18 and 19, fighting the demon lords and all the crazy things going on there. And I don't think I really kept up with all the rules and the mechanics of the game, but that's okay. We were doing crazy fun things, and I had a good time. Now I want to start over from the beginning so I can be there from the start. Right.
Yes.
And I think that's okay, but that's a harder thing to do well. Right. I've certainly had some people do that kind of stuff, and they join in and they had that experience. It was a blast. They got hooked because they got to start off at their very first experience. They were the godlike PCs, right? And that's fun, right? On the other hand, I've also had people come in and do that, and because they never felt connected to the story, because the story just didn't have the oomph and the meaning to them, you could tell they quickly sort of lost interest and then dropped after a few sessions. So it can go either way, and I just don't. If you cannot do it at those high levels at the end of a campaign, I think I pretty firmly believe it's a good idea to just not do it and bring them in. Offer to bring them in as soon as they get to the start of the next campaign.
Definitely.
Yeah, I guess an alternative I would say though is that honestly, given that I'm someone who came to actually start playing when I was 30. It really gets that way, honestly, even if it's not even a campaign specific. The people who go deep into knowing every single thing about every single monster and every single magic item and can go all the way from 0E to now, it can be difficult.
No.
And so it could kind of be cool, like I was saying with the NPC type thing, depending on the campaign and depending on the people and everything else. It's a good way to let them just have fun without it actually being a character where somebody else might expect them to know every in and out and how to optimize their builds and all that stuff.
I think that's where I see a lot of value in doing the game night, do a one shot, do that kind of stuff that's not the actual campaign, to give them a chance to sort of test some things out, and the pressure is low because everybody knows it's a one shot, so they're not as invested in well, this person screwed us up because they didn't know what they were doing, or they don't have any idea what's happening. They don't really know the sword coast like we do, or whatever. They're not so the pressure to keep up with the lore and the mechanics is hopefully lesser in that situation. But I get it. Like, a gaming group only gets to get together every so often, and you don't want to not do your regular campaign. Like, you're eager for it, you're anxious for it, you want to get to the next, to see what happens to your characters next. And so sometimes it's hard to be like, okay, let's take a week and just go do something else for a while.
I think I've been lucky where sometimes those coincide with the 2 or 3 people can't make it, and so you make that the week that you do your one shot or what have you. And it's always fun to like be able to fill that time where otherwise it would have been like, I guess we're not playing for 2 weeks. So I mean, sometimes you're lucky, and other times you're just like, no, that like we would have to interrupt the flow of all of this.
I find it's a lot easier to find the time to do different things with my current group because we play weekly, as opposed to my previous group that played twice a month or every other week or whatever. And when in that group, you know, so I'm on the playtest list for Wizards of the Coast, and so we'd get playtest stuff, and it's like, well, yeah, but we want to playtest it, but if we do, that means we don't get to play the campaign for another month, you know, and it was just really hard to make that sacrifice. Now with my current group, when we get something, then it's like, oh well, yeah, let's take some time off next week and go and do that, and that's fine because we're still going to play the campaign 3 times this month. So
that makes sense.
It's tough, and I imagine it's equally tough then when you got a new player to just say, well, let's just do a one shot. Well, that depends. Does that mean we're not going to play the campaign for a month? I don't want to give that time up for this person who may or may not stick around, you know?
It's true.
So.
Well, it kind of in that same vein of talking about all of that, I think we've been talking about campaigns like they're people, and obviously they can take on a life of their own, but like that's not to say that there might not even just be a group dynamic of like, oh, here's the group where half the people or more have known each other since high school, and bringing a new person into that, regardless of when or how, might be daunting as well.
Mm-hmm. One of the other suggestions I can give for bringing somebody into an established group in the middle of a campaign that worked really well for this one player that joined my current group, which again was at level, well, at that point maybe level 4, but with that character. But I tried to the one who had the one character who he got partway through and is like, I don't know that this character is really jiving with the play style. I want to try something new. And so with the second character, I'm like, well, here's what we do. We're going to integrate your character into the story in a meaningful way, and that'll get them to want to have you as part of the group. So we were playing Dragon Heist at that point, and so we made his new character. His new character was an escaped member of the Castellanter's cult. Like his character was a member of the cult. She was brought in through her boyfriend or whatever, was sort of roped her into it, and then she realized the horrible situation that it was and escaped, and then was able to be like a source of information for the players and the characters who were trying to find more information about the cult and what they were up to and how to stop them and whatever. And so that became a really easy hook to bring that character in and that player in a meaningful way, because I took the time to talk to the player ahead of time to be like, hey, what can we do with this character that you want to play that's going to really make them valuable to the rest of the party so that they welcome you in, you know? And so you feel connected to the story. And so that was, I think, a good choice for what I did with that. Or at least it worked well, better than the first time we tried to integrate a character in.
No, that's fantastic and a really, really good advice. Like, you don't want to just say, hey, this person was just standing on the side of the road and they're going the same direction as you, and that just kind of feels like you're tacking someone onto the group. And I mean, I'm sure that like there's been like more and less artful ways of bringing new people in, but like really trying to make a new character feel like they're part of the story, it takes a little bit more work, but it's absolutely worth it, because then they understand like, oh no, that I'm necessary for the story, and so I'm necessary for this group.
Absolutely. So I think it's okay at this point to transition to the other part of this then. So how is this process different when you're a new player but also a new campaign? So you've got an established group, but it's a brand new campaign that we're just starting off, right? How does that differ than what we talked about before?
So we're talking like new campaign, new player.
Yep. New campaign, new player, established group.
Yeah. I mean, I think at that point, It's a great place to start. It's a great like ideal circumstance, I think, for just the new person coming in. But there's still challenges there. Like you've got, it's like what I was saying, like, the people who've been playing since high school or whatever. So you're just kind of coming into a group that's got its own, like, verbal tics and history and so on and so forth. And so I think the easy part is that everyone will feel like a group as characters. The hard part, I think, will be like making sure that the new person feels welcome, that they feel comfortable. That's where, like, maybe you would do a little bit more work on a session 0, and just talk a little bit more about what you're comfortable with, what sounds fun, just kind of getting a better feel for what the group is, so that the new person can kind of figure out where they fit. And I guess I'm trying to find the right wording for it, but it's like it's not on the player to like figure out how to be a good fit for the group, but it's to like understand if that's something that they would even want to do.
Yeah, and I was thinking along similar lines. I think this is a perfect time to really lean into the session 0, right? To use this new campaign as an excuse to be like, let's just establish the new sort of group dynamics, the new group norms and expectations. And I wouldn't even do it, I wouldn't talk about it in terms of let's do it so that the new person is clear on what those things are. I would do it as occasionally these are the kinds of things that should be revisited. Let's just assume the group is starting fresh and let's rebuild these concepts, these ideas, these group dynamics from scratch. And so I think that's a good idea. And it may be that the group is like, well, I like this thing and that thing and whatever, let's keep doing that. And so there's maybe a little bit of a shorthand there for them. And you can bring the new person along, right? It's all of the social issues with bringing in a new person without any of the campaign issues. Although that said, I think if I was smart, and I'm not always smart, but I think if I was smart, it would still be a really good idea to do that whole, like, how can I make the new person's character really important to the story, right? Because
Absolutely.
They don't have the advantage of the history with the players, but that's a way for the players to instantly sort of buy into the character. Like, we need this person's character. We need them. They are integral to us achieving our goals and as we get together in this new campaign. So I think that still kind of works.
Yeah, absolutely. And it could even guide the decision of like what campaign do we play. You find something that would play to the strengths of the people there, including the new person, and just kind of go, does this sound interesting? Do you want to, play this campaign that has everything to do with like a bunch of giants, or would you rather play this campaign where it's more intrigue and you're hanging around the city more often and so on, and so it's a great place to start sculpting things for the group, both the established characters and the new person.
Okay. Any other thoughts on, I guess, any of this? Let's do last thoughts. We've almost been talking for an hour, so I guess it's okay to start wrapping.
Well, I guess one thing we haven't talked about is there might be cases where we do have people coming and going pretty often. So like if you are in a school group or particularly college and stuff like that, are there campaign like ways of orienting the campaign that might, or storytelling that might be more make it easier to have people come and go?
I mean, yeah, it would. I think there are play styles that kind of go more for that, and whether it's a different system, because I've heard of different systems that are very good for like that kind of plug and play of players. But even with D&D, I think like either you go with an older style where just you run with whatever character happens to be, and it's a little I guess how D&D used to be, it's like, oh, somebody died, bring in someone new, or so on. But I've also heard people use these kind of a little bit more of a zany campaign design where it's like maybe you're going through an interdimensional dungeon, and that allows for like new people to come and go all the time. I think I've seen some live plays that kind of operate that way, specifically because we're bringing in a new person as a guest star or whatever. So I think there's ways to do it as long as everyone is kind of on board with that premise of just like there's going to be a revolving door, people, and you. Like I think I said it before, but it's like the campaign then has to be kind of like its own entity at that point, because it has to be the connective tissue where like if the people are not.
Yeah, I think at that point I start. You know, my struggle right now in a long running group is oftentimes how do I take established storylines and published adventures and make it connect to the players and to their stories and to their characters. And I think it kind of goes the other way in that situation, because you can't build a campaign off of telling the story based entirely off of the characters if those characters are coming and going. And so have your characters. They can have their growth. They can have their development. They can go into town and say, I walk down the street, who do I see? And you ask them, hey, you see somebody that you grew up with. Who are they? You can still bring in their character a little bit, but not make the story based on that character if you don't know they're going to be there next week, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And so I imagine a lot more sort of short, episodic stories that could tell a larger story. I found when I ran the middle school group, I pulled a lot of bundles of Adventures League seasons and ran it that way. So they're all kind of self-contained, but when you get to the end, you kind of look back at it and see that you were telling a larger story. So that kind of thing works, I think, pretty well for that kind of revolving cast thing. I almost think of it like like I'm running a D&D as Justice League Unlimited, if you remember that old cartoon, right? Yes. We've got this whole stable of hundreds of superheroes, but who's going to go on this adventure,
Exactly.
Yeah, because I was in a game for a while, I think it was 3rd edition. You just had to end up back in town because the person running it wanted to have a large group be able to play, and so the 6 people who said that they could make it that week, the first 6 were the ones that got to play, and thus the roster wasn't the same necessarily every week or every time we met. So as long as you ended up back in town, it was all fine. And then other things you could do with that is, if you're designing the world, you just have a lot of other extra characters in it that maybe already have some back and forth with the players, player characters that people could assume over time.
Yeah, and that's a little like in my North Carolina group. We had at different times 6 or 7 players specifically, and that was the one where I would oftentimes recruit. I wanted about 7 players because we're all adults and we all have other things going on and whatever. And so any given session, I just assumed that at least 1, maybe 2 players weren't going to be there. But that was a little different because it was still within a relatively small group. So I could still sort of bring in player-driven narratives. And if that player wasn't there that day, then I just sort of figure out on the fly how to shove that character, that story that we were going to tell onto the back burner and bring it up later, And that was 4th edition, so it was easy. I just throw an encounter at him, and that would take the whole session.
Yeah. And I mean, and it does go back to, like, what are you trying to get out of the game? Are you trying to build elaborate player-driven stories, but still largely massaged, versus a story of an area that's kind of discovered over time, and a lot more of, like, happens at the table and doesn't necessarily have an intentional arc.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like in games like those, it would almost have to be more progress-driven, or like goal-driven, to where it's like, okay, doesn't matter who's there on a given day, but you have to go do this thing.
Right.
Like, maybe your goal is you have to go find the MacGuffin, and there's all these clues, and so like the work is to go and collect the clues, so it doesn't matter who's there on a given day. The clues are all collected into one place, and then so you're kind of working towards that goal. You're kind of like filling up a progress meter, and the people who are there aren't necessarily like as important to the story.
Yeah, and that's like if there's a specific story trying to be told. I guess like with some sandbox adventures and stuff like that, there's not. Sometimes with some of the games, there's not even necessarily a specific story, so you wouldn't know you're making progress to a goal because you're kind of exploring as you go on, and a probably more dice driven story in a way.
Back in the first and second edition days, that was how the game largely was designed to function. Like, they didn't publish big campaigns; they published individual adventures that took half a level, if that, and you'd piece them together and you'd run one, and then that was fun. But here's another one that I've got that's about the right level. Let's do that one next, and and so you progressed in that way. But yeah, no, I think that's you could run those a little episodic. There's not as many of those style of adventures being sold these days, unless you go to DM's Guild and just get all the things published by wonderful people like Ismail. But there are collections of those, right? Sly Flourish's Fantastic Layers, Sly Flourish and James Gray, who published the Fantastic Layers, works together that way. I think Kobold has one called Eldritch Layers that kind of you could just pull individual pieces out of. Tales of the Old Margrave works that, so you could get enough of the, or even Ghosts of Saltmarsh or Tales from the Yawning Portal. You could sort of piecemeal little episodic adventures that way pretty well.
Yeah, that tends to be more my style, and that's probably why I don't run a lot of published adventures.
Sure, and I think there's value to that, and I think that can be a fun way to play. We've gotten I don't know, biased in modern play by a lot of streaming campaigns, the Critical Roles and that kind of stuff, and they have these in-depth character-driven sort of storylines. I like the idea of doing the episodic one, but putting it in the frame of a larger event or whatever, like put it in the Forgotten Realms, put it out in the country of Aglarond, which is, and a war has just broken out between Aglarond and Thay. And then all the campaigns are happening within the context of there's this war raging. And you can do a lot with that. And so there's a larger story, but it's not like you don't have to progress the story. You just have to know there's a war going on in the background.
Right.
Or set in Eberron during the last war.
Right. Ooh. I like that idea.
No. Anyway, I've rambled. And when I said we were almost at an hour, that was 10 minutes ago. So any other last thoughts or topics that people want to bring up?
Well, I was gonna. Oh, yeah. So to that end, I'm glad that I got my train of thought back. I think that it's interesting because you were talking earlier about tiers and so on. I think that it's interesting that Wizards of the Coast has done all of these great campaigns that range from about 1 to 13, and I think there is some intentionality behind that because that's about the time that you can have like a written down start to finish campaign, and if you go any further than that, then the story is more about the characters than their goals. And so that's when you start kind of spinning off into all these wild things of like, oh, you did that thing like 5 months ago, and now it's really come back to bite you in the butt. Now we're all dealing with that, and that's not something you can write down. That's not something that you can do in a written campaign. That's just something that happens organically. And I think in a way they're wise to stay away from doing that end level content because it doesn't feel as fun to do something that's going to be like, oh, we're going to tell you how your end game goes and you're going to follow it bit by bit, where usually by that time, if you have played from start to finish to like 1 to 13 or whatever, you'll have stories to tell. You'll have a character that is driven by motivations and actions. And so I think that's kind of part and parcel what we're talking about. It's like once you're bringing people in, um, they either have to have the time to grow into that kind of into those stories, or they have to understand it's like, oh, you're this it's too late for you to do that. You're just going to come into this like really cool action movie. I think your comparison to Infinity Wars and Endgame is perfect because that's exactly right. You could watch those movies absent of everything that happened before them. It would be a lot of fun. You're kind of missing out on a lot of stuff.
Right. Well, and I don't know if I necessarily agree that they're wise to have completely avoided that, but that is a detailed conversation that we had in last month's episode, where we did a whole episode with Sean Merwin and Josh Perry about so all the campaigns end at level 12. What do you do with your characters in your campaign after that? That was sort of the premise of that whole episode. So we could talk about that at length and have. So.
Excellent. I know what I'm listening to.
There you go. Well, I don't know that it's been released yet. Sam has been swamped with getting everything caught up and getting his semester started too. But
yeah, gosh.
Anyway, are we good wrapping things up then? Because I am tired and it's bedtime.
Yes.
All right. Not to cut anybody off. I could stay up. But...
No,
okay.
Not at all.
Okay, then we're going to go ahead and call that the end of the episode.
We'd like to say thank you to our sponsor, AwesomeDice.com, and to our guest, Ishmael.
Yes, thank you.
Ish, where can people go and find you on the internet?
I have changed my social media so that I am Elven Wizard King, and anywhere you can find me, which is on Twitch. I do streaming Mondays and Thursdays. Mondays I have my Rime of the Frost Maiden game, which is due to end in a few months. So come and watch the exciting end game content now. Mm-hmm. It's kind of relevant to what we're talking about. The Thursdays I do video game streaming, and then otherwise you can find me. Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, though I'm less active on there these days. And then if you happen to be on DriveThruRPG or DM's Guild, I have content on both under my given name of Ismael Alvarez. A little harder to spell than Elven Wizard King.
Awesome. And we'd also like to say thank you to all of you who support us by being patrons at patreon.com/The Tome Show.
If you want to get a hold of us, you can email thetomeshow@gmail.com. You can find Tracy on Twitter. She is at Sarah Darkmagic. That's Sarah with an H. I am at Squatch, SQUACH. The show is at The Tome Show. Although I'm most of the people who respond to that, although there's a few other people with access to the Tome Show account as well. Mostly Lewis to post stuff from the news, and Sam to post stuff when he posts new episodes.
And that's episode 348, where we grew our ranks and recruited an army of gamers. Yes. In this episode of
The Tome. The end. Oh,
very nice.
When I can see it. Yeah, oh, there it is.
Hold on.
Leaves.
Oh, if I just put it in front
of...
No, my face has to be there.
Or not. I don't know. There it is.
There you go. That's lovely.
Thanks.
So I am going to go back over to OBS and stop the stream. According to Twitch, there's a few people watching, so say goodbye to them.
Bye, stream.
Bye, stream.
Transition.